Green Fruit, Chapter 14. Moya gratefully lifted Karin in his arms, the raw vulnerability of their current situation moving from us versus who the hell are they to Karin versus contractions and Moya versus whoever the hell they were, they're dead now, into a blissful, terrified moment of us. Okay, there was still shooting and contractions, but he took a few long breaths, felt the tension in her muscles, felt the referred pain through her body. He wished he could feel it for her. He wished she'd take drugs so she didn't have to feel pain, but based on the alert level at the moment, she was unwilling to take any. He imagined the shuttle breached and boarded, everyone else dead, pregnant Karin taking down invaders with a... What? What was sufficiently Karin? Seatbelt buckle swung over her head by the strap she ripped off in her teeth. Because she's that badass. He wanted to squeeze her a little harder, but he figured she had enough squeeze going on. Beyond active shooting, there was active pursuit. Thane and Garrus had managed a delicate set of diplomatic circumstances that might benefit Moya personally and the Alliance in the long run, but the short run was going to be shooty. With the evidence presented, Palavin was entirely willing to believe that the human counselor was indoctrinated. Great. Flip side, the Gambit might potentially lead a bunch of Turian politicians to convince Salarian and Asari politicians that humans were not suited to being a council race, what with Udina being a dick. And then an indoctrinated dick. Now that might sound bad. Because it was, no way around it. It was bad. So, here they were in a vehicle with diplomatic protection but no real physical protection, pursued by potentially indoctrinated Cerberus and Citadel forces. Palavin would want to protect their assets, Garrus as their prized advisor, Moya as their prized diplomat/informant, and of course the vehicle itself, which qualified as sovereign soil of Palavin. Anybody firing on them would potentially be committing an act of intergalactic war. Now, that might also sound bad. Because it really was. They all had motivations to shoot at each other, protective or otherwise. The Alliance had not been consulted about Moya's diplomatic exit. Cerberus wanted war, and the Citadel forces under Udina would also ultimately want war. But their other option had been stay at ground zero until sufficiently murdered. So here they were, with Garrus not reporting into Palavin or Alliance forces for defense because he didn't want that intergalactic war. Peace was dependent on evasion and not confrontation. So the plan was run like hell from Palavini, Alliance, Cerberus, and Citadel forces until what? Well, probably Reapers invading. They all knew that was going to happen. They were definitely going to run until this whole baby thing was resolved. Oh, and they were going to, technically, steal the Normandy. Edie was tired of being in port, and she had termed the whole stealing, technically, as shore leave, which she had every right to if that ever came up in court. Too bad that, as a legal entity, she was, well, illegal. She also didn't qualify for dental insurance in many ways. So unfair. Now, he could try to protect Edie with Spectre authority and secrecy, because, theoretically, he was above the law. However, what with the current situation? Spectrehood was about to be as stable as Udina's mind. He didn't want to interrupt Garrus right now. Thane had moved to the cockpit, and Moya heard the whining discharge and ricochet of weapons, and felt the jerking shock of evasive maneuvers. Moya was keeping Karin from the worst of the impacts, but she was still experiencing progressive labor. He leaned down to her, his voice nowhere near as calm as he'd like, but she'd know he was trying. Hey, Lady, I've been thinking that maybe Grace isn't the right name. Is that so? Mm-hmm. Maybe we should do what my mother intended. You know, name her after a great warrior. There's a Krogan battlemaster named Arugula. Her lips twitched and then she laughed. That laugh meant she loved him so very much. Then that laugh ended on a sharp intake of breath and a stifled whimper. He should have been keeping track of the timing of contractions. No doubt they were getting closer together and stronger. That's how that worked. He didn't need to ask her. He closed his eyes when she closed hers, feeling his face mirror her drawn brows. His arms were, he hoped, cradling and protective, but not tight. His lips in her hair. When he opened his eyes again to look around the shuttle, Day and Kolyat had moved to sit on either side of David. Moya was so very proud of David, briefly washed with the internal warmth of fully claiming that radiant being as part of his family. David looked less anxious than anyone, and it appeared that Day was reciting prime numbers with him. Kolyat listened to each declarative sequence with what looked like the same wonder and ill-disguised terror that was latticing Moya's spine. He'd been so close to praying so often. He did not believe in gods, but please, please, please. Maybe a god could believe in him for once. He thought, look, I know I'm mostly about swearing and not so much with the praise, and I know there was that time that I died, and really, I wasn't worth much at the time, so I can totally get where letting me turn into a Shepsicle was a potentially good call. But right now, I need help. Please. Not for me. For everyone else. For the woman in my arms. For our daughter. For our son. For a part-Batarian lady who is covered in blood and comforting recitation. That has to be a prayer to someone reasonable, but she's too busy being useful to ask for herself. For a Drell, who might track you down and kill you, or take over if you don't listen. For a Turian whose planet needs him. For an illegal AI that needs shore leave and dental. Please. In the end, it required continued evasive maneuvers involving meticulous planning and execution. They could not consult with anybody about their flight plan. Thane informed them that Edie was encountering resistance of her own. Moya nodded, not pointing out that resistance meant people. The shuttle progressively evaded and fled, made it to the Sol Mass Effect relay, and then scrambled through several other relays in succession, as did Edie. The transit evolution took 2.5 hours. After they'd gone through the first relay, there had been no more close-range weapons fire, but there was more in the way of intensifying contractions and concern about being detected. They continued to scramble to evade detection or pursuit until Edie and Thane had determined they had not been successfully detected, predicted, or tracked, and the odds of discovery were less than 1 percentage point. When minds wiser than his own made the determination that they were safe to rendezvous, the shuttle boarded the Normandy, and they moved stealthed and physically, hopefully, hidden in the dark shadow of a moon in a system that was so underpopulated that the moon itself was only classified by a string of numbers and letters. The only other known sentient presence in the system was several rings out, and populated only by, hopefully, mild-mannered Prothean experts that were excavating a remote dig. He intermittently suggested that they name their daughter after fictional historical figures like Varuvan, the Batarian Shah, and Harissa, the scourge of the Yasari skies. Karin had smiled at him weakly and told him she did not favor spice blends or pastry as name options. In between teasing, he clarified that she wanted to be in the medbay and not their quarters for the birth. Good. Their quarters might be comfortable, but there was an aura of invincibility about her in her medbay that comforted him in a superstitious way. Then again, she didn't feel it would be easy enough to ride it out, so to speak, in the bed where they had ridden so many other things out. Do not say that out loud, Moya. Do not. It's going to physically harm her to try to laugh at that one. With reassuring nods from Day and Kolyat, he knew that David would be in the best of hands. Day got herself cleaned up, and he wasn't sure it was an improvement overall. Blood somehow suited her. As he carried Karin to the medbay, Day was right with him and started working her now clean and always confident magic the moment they arrived. Garrus and Thane were in charge, and they both knew it. Moya didn't need a briefing. All he needed was the "Welcome aboard, Commander," from Edie. Thank you, Edie. Garrus is in charge. You're all set for a baby? Yes, Commander. Inventory was certainly confusing for many of the Alliance personnel who puzzled over some of the items, but mislabeling them was certainly not a challenge. He imagined a crib and a bunch of diapers that had been classified as bulwark struts or ballast padding, and vowed to also not mention those to Karin right now. Putting her down on the medbay bed was superstitiously terrifying where before it had been comforting. She was no longer in his arms. She's not in charge here now. Karin was slick with sweat and exhausted, tremor shuddering through her between contractions. Her exhales of breath and involuntary whimpers had grown from coherent and suppressed pain to a progressively more and more raw experience that was not filtered through thought or mind, but went straight from straining flesh to pained voicing of itself, his wife missing from her own eyes. Her eyes were most often closed, and when they opened, she was either unable or not attempting to focus them, primal green rolling and even crossing as she seemed to slowly drown in the rising tide of labor. Day seemed near telepathic, and Karin did not argue with her or direct anything. Moya's hand went numb from holding onto her helplessly, white-knuckled. Whatever Day gave her, the pain seemed to ebb, but the effort intensified. Moya was merely present as his beautiful and intelligent wife lost her mind, but gained a presence of inevitable life. He took Day's cue of near silence and saw the need for it. Much of Karin's mind, which would need to surge up out of the whirlpool and expend effort to process words, was gone. The rest of her was immersed in the effort, in the experience, the way they could both be when they were immersed in sex. The creation of us, and then the creation of her. Their grace. The sacraments of the medbay were mysterious. Moving around him, he was tangential to miracles. His prayers were answered in the timeless stream of her medbay and body, the life and pain that happened therein. Day's direction was calm and sure, Karin wrung with sweat and purpose, until in the silent, prayer-rich room, the blessing of grace was placed in his hands with Day's beaming smile, Karin's weak panting, and her trying to focus again eyes. He could not feel one of his hands, and his arms and mind were trembling, but he was there, his screaming and screwed tight-shut eyes of baby fury were his first impression of his daughter. When her eyes first opened, he was met with a furious struggle of grace to find dignity in the storm. Black hair and gray-green eyes that seemed to swerve to his to demand an explanation for this outrage. He sat down by default due to weak knees and numbed muscles, shifting Grace so Karin could see her, her trembling hand extending to stroke back the short, wet curls on Grace's head. He swallowed hard. Hey. Welcome. I would have liked to meet under better circumstances, but she's your mom. So, those are the best circumstances I can arrange. It's gonna be okay. Now, you seem like a smart lady, and yeah, sometimes I can be full of it, but in this case, Grace. That's your name. Grace. I mean it. We're going to make it better. That's what we do. That's what your mom does. That's what Day did. That's Day. Moya tilted her up for Day to see. Day gave a lovesick and happy smile and said conspiratorially to the baby, "That's not my name, but unlike your father, you can call me anything you want." Moya snorted a chuckle, and that seemed to surprise his daughter, who had stopped crying briefly, but seemed to be winding up again for a full-blown tantrum. And under the circumstances, Moya could really only be jealous. Day repossessed Grace and did a great deal of medical hoorah that was sedate and involved baby talk and not so many needles. Reassuringly healthy tantrum continued, and superstition was no longer required. Karin was smiling, and he slid his numb and cold hand back into hers. Her grip was as gentle as her smile, as her eyes opened, and he saw his adamant empress, now with a dynasty to protect. He told her, "By every god I just prayed to or tried to pray to, you are so beautiful." She smiled, readjusted her pillow with her other arm, and looked completely satisfied with herself. "Thank you, Cherie. So are you." "Did you try to pray too?" "Oh, yes." "Did they listen?" "I believe they must have. I have everything I need."